We've been walking through the book of Romans. The last few things we've talked about were grace and the gospel, and how the law has held us captive. That's what he said in the first part of chapter 7. There was this phrase that we saw in Romans chapter 6, verse 14, that said that sin will not have dominion over you anymore because you are not under law but under grace. And so we spent time talking, Paul spent time, we were just reading what he wrote through the Holy Spirit, about what it means to be under law, what it means to be under grace, those things. And the last thing that we saw, I'm catching you up, in the first part of Romans chapter 7, he told us that the law held us captive. He said we were captive in the very verse 6 of Romans chapter 7. He said we were captive to this thing. It was something that was over us because we could not keep it, and we couldn't do good enough to please God. And it says now, because of Christ, because of the grace that has come through the gospel, we have been released. Let me just read verse 6 to you. That's what we saw the last time we were here. It says, "But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code." It almost sounds, it's kind of a vivid way of putting it, almost sounds like the law is a bad thing. It's an oppressive thing, an evil thing, a wicked thing. Paul's going to address that, and he's going to show us today, what I hope to get across to you today, is that the law is necessary in the Christian life. It's not how we're saved, it's not how we come to know Jesus, not how we please God, it's not how we gain righteousness, but it's something that we do not throw away in our growing Christian life. In case you're wondering, we're not remodeling. I brought this 2x4 up here. There was this blind carpenter. Yes, they do exist. And the blind carpenter loved working with wood. He loved building things. He loved making things. He wasn't always blind, but he became blind, and he wanted to continue doing the things that he wanted to do. And he found this contractor that was building a subdivision full of houses, and he really wanted to continue doing what he loved most. And so he goes to this contractor. Remember, this guy's blind, and the blind carpenter says, "Look, I am an expert woodworker. I'm an expert builder. I'm an expert carpenter. I want the chance to be able to work on some of your houses here in the subdivision." Now, the contractor's looking at him like, "Yeah, okay, you're blind. I mean, how are you going to do that?" But he doesn't want to be mean. He doesn't want to send him off. He doesn't want to hurt the guy's feelings. So he says, "Okay, I'm just going to test him out, see if he can do it." He says, "Go over there and grab a 2x4 and cut it. I want it to be 6 foot and a quarter." And he says, "Okay." So the blind guy goes over there. Don't ask me how, but he picks up a 2x4 and he cuts it. And he brings it back to the contractor and he says, "Here's your board." The contractor, what's the first thing that he does? Yeah, he gets his tape measure, measures it out, and it's not 6 1/4, it's 6 3/4. And so he says, "Sir, you did really good for a blind guy, but 6 3/4 is not what I needed. I need 6 1/4. And so, to be honest, if I try to use that board, I'm not going to be able to. It's going to mess up the measurements of the house. Nothing's going to be square. It's not going to fit. The guy said, "Please, just give me one more chance, and I promise you I can do it." So the contractor pretty much knows that it's not going to be possible, but he says, "Okay, this time I want you to go and cut me a board that's 6 1/4. He figures, the guy just cut one that was 6 1/4, so maybe he'll do the same thing and get it. And so the guy did the same thing. He went and got a 2x4. He cut the board. He brought it back, and the contractor took out his tape measure, and he measured the board, and it's 6 1/2. Still a 1/4 inch short. He said, "It's really good, but I can't use you. I mean, if you can't cut a board the measurement that I need, I'm not going to be able to use you." And so the blind carpenter goes home. He's sad. His wife says, "Did you get the job, honey?" She says, "No, I didn't get the job." He says, Why didn't you get it? What happened?" He said, "The man's tape measure is trying to keep me down." Is it the tape measure's fault that the man can't cut the board? The tape measure doesn't care whether the man gets the job. He doesn't care what the man's circumstances are. The tape measure tells you how it is. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you think the board is. Doesn't matter what you hope the board is. Doesn't matter what you want the board to be. The board is as long as the tape measure says. When we were remodeling our house to sell it in Tennessee, I am a terrible carpenter. You don't want me fixing anything, I promise you. And I had all this trouble getting things going. And I go to this carpenter guy and I asked him, I was like, "Give me some tips." He said, "Son, whatever that tape measure says is what it is. And so the law is the same way. It's the standard. The law doesn't care what your circumstances are. The law doesn't care how you hope or what you intended or how it could be. It is the standard of what is right and what is wrong. It is the standard of sin. If the law says it's a sin, I don't care what you say or I say or anybody else says. It's a sin. And so the law is not an evil, oppressive thing. It's not a thing that's trying to keep you down and keep you in captivity. The law is not the problem. The problem is sin. The tape measure was not the carpenter's problem. The problem was the board that the carpenter kept cutting. And so the law for us, you can't throw it away in the Christian life just because we're not under the penalty of it anymore. If you've come to know Christ and you've been born again by the Spirit of God, you are not under the penalty of the law. You will never, listen to me, I say this and a lot of people come talk to me afterward, but it's a true statement and I'm going to keep on saying it. If you're born again by the Spirit of God, there will never be a time in this life or the next that you will be punished for your sin. That punishment was taken on the cross. But that does not mean because your punishment has now been taken and the penalty is gone that we chunk the law out the window and say, I don't have to worry about that anymore. The law is necessary for us. We need to see what the law says. We need to understand the standard that God has set. It is not the law that is keeping you oppressed and keeping you captive. It is sin inside of us. And Paul is going to demonstrate that as we read. It says in verse 7, I want you to see that first of all, the law has value because it reveals the presence of sin. Look what he says in verse 7. He says, what then shall we say? That the law is sin? He says, by no means. He says it can't happen. No way it can happen. He says, yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. We have to have a standard in order to see where we're lacking in that standard. How long you think this board is? I don't care. Wait a minute. I don't care. I know it's some good carpenters, builders in here. I know it is. 3 foot 4 inches. Anybody else want to guess? Yeah, you don't get no prize. I don't care how good you are. You can't tell me how much. You can't tell me unless you pull a tape out and measure this board. You cannot tell me how. You can guess, and you might be right once in a while, but you can't tell me for sure. Most of my builder friends in the first service, and I'm sure some of you guys here will say it's 3 foot because they cut them in 3 foot, but it's not. It's 2 foot and 11 inches. I measured it. That's the only reason I know because I pulled out the tape measure and I measured it. I don't care how good you are. Without a tape measure, you cannot tell me how long it is. And without the law, we can't know what sin is. That's what he said. Now, we're made in the image of God. There's all of us, everyone, all over the planet, all that have ever lived, made in the image of God. So there is a sense in which all of us know that it's wrong to kill someone. All civilizations, all societies have known all the time. There's people that are messed up in the head and crazy people and just wicked people that will do it. But we all know that it's wrong to kill people. But look at the example that Paul uses here. He said, I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. Now, think about this. You probably would know, just intuitively, based on your conscience, based on being made in the image of God, that it's wrong to kill folks, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to do those things written on your heart. But how many of you, be honest, would know that wanting something somebody else has is wrong if the law had not said that it's wrong? I mean, really, that's just stuff going on in my mind. That's stuff that's going on in my heart. I'm not acting on it. I'm not taking anybody's stuff. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not going after anything. It's just things going on in my mind. I mean, how can that be wrong? It's wrong because the tape measure says that it's wrong. And so what he says here is we need the law to show us our sin. Even before, as we go and talk about this evangelism training, as we go out and get ready to do all these things in the community, leading people to Christ, you need to understand that the law is necessary for us to understand that we are sinners. It's necessary for a person who's lost to understand the depth of their sin, to understand their unholiness before God, their unrighteousness before God, and to see the depth and the greatness of it and the fact that they cannot escape from it. So that law is a mirror, a schoolmaster that pushes them to the gospel. When they realize there's no hope for you earning salvation or doing better or keeping the law in order to please God, what that does is it brings a despair that pushes you to the only hope that you have, and that's Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And there you find grace. There you find forgiveness. And so when he says, I would not have known what sin was were it not for the law, you need to understand that if the tape says the board is 2 foot and 11 inches, the board is 2 foot and 11 inches. I don't care how much you want it to be something else, or how much you can ignore it, or you can pretend. When I was a young man, just out of high school, I worked with a builders, and I was kind of, the gopher, going and helping and pulling cords and doing those things. And the guy tried to get me to learn how to do this stuff. He didn't know that I'm severely handicapped in that area. And he was teaching me how to cut stuff, and he would say, go and cut this and make it this long. And I would always cut on the wrong side of the mark. So if you know anything about building, you know what it's not much. It's like 1/8 of an inch. But I would cut on the wrong side of the mark and bring in the board, and he'd say, well, that's not right. You cut on the wrong side of the mark. I thought, it's just a little bit. It's not going to hurt. No, it is going to hurt. It needs to be exactly this long, and it doesn't matter if you say, well, it's not a big deal, it's going to be fine, it's going to fit, it's going to be all right. No, that's not how it works. This is the standard that you must reach. And what that does is it reveals sin in us. It reveals who we are. And to be honest with you, we as Christians need that. We need our sin to be revealed continually. We need to understand, when we get saved, we have a tendency, I have a tendency to start thinking, you know what? I'm doing good. I'm doing a whole lot better. When I was first saved, God took away a whole lot of things that characterized my previous life. He just took them away. They were gone. And you start to think, you know what? I'm pretty good. God sure is lucky to have me. I'm doing well, and I'm getting along, and I wish all these people would just be like me. Boy, the kingdom of God would come on if everybody would just be like me. And then when you start realizing, I'm not that holy after all. I still have this sin. I still have that sin. I still have all of these things going on. The law reveals just how perfect the standard is. And anything that doesn't reach that standard is sin. God said, love me as I deserve to be loved. And every time we fail in that, and we do fail in that, sin. And it's revealed to us that it's sin by the law. Would you know that it is wrong to covet? Would you not? The law reveals to us the presence of sin, and we desperately need it revealed. David said, search me, O God, and show me. Show me the things that are in me. It's easy to slide back. Say, I'm not hurting anyone, I'm doing all. It forces us. The law forces us to see our sin. And by seeing our sin, see our lack. Still, even as a Christian, see our need. And that pushes us back to the cross. It pushes us back to where we get our power from. Back to where we found grace. Back to where our source comes from. We never get too far and say, you know what, I'm doing good now. I need less spirit than I used to need because I'm doing so much better. No, when your sin is revealed on a daily basis, and it is, you are forced back to the cross and say, I am desperately dependent upon you. The second thing it does is it reveals the power of sin in us. Look what he says in verse 8. He says, but sin, he says, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. Now, I got lots of questions about this verse. Look what it says. Look at the language that he used. Sin is not just doing something wrong. I made a mistake. I stubbed my toe. I messed up. I did something wrong right there. The way he's framing this, it sounds like sin is a power. Sin is a force inside of us. He says, sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. I'm thinking, wait a minute, isn't covetousness sin? To covet is a sin. How is sin producing covetousness? The way he's framing this, the way the language is set up is that sin is this power inside of us. We call it the flesh. We call it the sinful nature. We call it that old man that is part of us that is longing for us to go back to the old ways. It's the sin that is inside of us. This power inside of us, it's not just acts, it's a force in us, and it desires what it desires. Sin has been spoken like this from all the way from the beginning. Back when Cain, his offering wasn't accepted. I don't know if you know that story. Genesis chapter 4, Cain and Abel both brought an offering to the Lord. God accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's offering, and Cain was mad and downcast. And God came to Cain and he said this. He said, "Why are you downcast?" He said, "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" And then he said, "And if not, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is to have you." Today it's no different. Sin is powerful. Sin is powerful in us. And when we start thinking that we're more powerful than sin and I can dabble in it and do this and do that, you are on a tightrope that is about to snap. The question I have about this verse was Legion this week when it said, sin taking the opportunity through the commandment produced in me covetousness. I'm thinking, first of all, how does sin produce more sin? And then secondly, how in the world can you say that's a good thing? He says, sin produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Now, let me give you a story that may illustrate it, and it's one I'm just making up, so don't think this is Bible. But the Apostle Paul, Mr. Pharisee, is walking around the town of Jerusalem or wherever, and he sees another Pharisee riding on a donkey, and it's a good-looking donkey. And so he says, "You know what? I want a donkey like that. In fact, I deserve that donkey more than he does, because I am the Pharisee. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin." Something about the rule that makes me, it awakens sin in me. That's why when you see a sign that says, "Keep off the grass," the first thing you want to do is, I touched it. I don't care. It brings up the natural rebellion of sin. You can't tell me what to do. We have this discussion at our house all the time where, and it goes both ways, so don't think I'm a bad husband or dad, but, that somebody will say something and they'll phrase it like this. They'll say, "Well, what you need to do is you need to get over there and fix," and just the tone will be like, I don't need to do anything. There's just something inside of us that don't tell me what to do. I'm free to do whatever I want to do. And it just produces more. Paul would say, not only do I deserve the donkey, I deserve a stable for the donkey. And I deserve a slave to help me tend the donkey, and a donkey for the slave to ride. I deserve 2 donkeys and a stable and a slave. It grows. It grows in us because we have a rebellious streak in us. Don't tell me what to do. It produces. And then Paul, when I'm thinking the sin condemns him, convicts him, and he understands, this is sin, then you go and you find a good rabbi who's got this under control, and you say, "I want to be like you," and say, "Wait, that's coveting too." It never ends. There was a time in my life where I thought, I'm doing good. I'm doing a whole lot better than everybody else, and, everything's good, and I'm glad that I'm walking in holiness and those kind of things. And God revealed to me, but He revealed in me that I had a lack of love for people. A lack of love. Now, if you saw me from the outside, it looked like everything's fine. I love all kind of folks, and you're doing so much, and it's all good. But inside, there was just a lack of love. And then when that command, "Love your neighbor as yourself," came, there was something inside of me that says, okay, I want to follow this command. How do I do it? And I'm the kind of guy that, if I need to know how to do something, I'll go buy a book and I'll read it and I'll figure out how to do it. Give me step 1, step 2, step 3. Tell me the steps. Show me how to do it, and I'm going to do it. But all I could learn was how to act like I love people. All I could do was try harder to act like I'm loving. How do I change my own heart to love, to actually love? I don't want to act like I love people. I want to actually love people. How do I do that? The command came. I was walking along fine. Everything's wonderful. The command came. Love your neighbor as yourself. You're not doing this. And all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I start seeing where I'm not loving anyone anywhere. Not rightly, not properly, not with the right motivation, not with the right intent. It was all. I came to a point where basically I said, it's impossible. You can't do it. And so what happened was God revealed to me, not like a vision or anything, but He showed me that, yeah, that's the point. You doing it is impossible. You can't change your heart. You can't obey this command that I've given you. When you try to obey this command, it just leads to more sin. That's why we need the gospel. That's why we need Christ. It was real to me, Jason, you can't change your heart. You can't make your heart a more loving heart. You have to depend on me. You have to lean on me. You have to be dependent upon me, and I will change your heart. I will cause you to keep my commandments. And so the law reveals the presence of sin in us, but it also reveals the power of sin in us. Don't ever think, Christian, that you are stronger than sin. In and of yourself, in your flesh, in your own strength, in your own will, in your own power, you are not. I don't care. You can bang your fist and say, today I'm going to change. It's going to be different. You'll be right back to the same place you are. Right. The only power that is stronger, that's the sin that is in us, is the Spirit of the living God that indwells us when we are saved and born again, and we focus on the gospel and we trust in the gospel, and this law reveals the presence of sin, it reveals the power of sin, and it pushes us back to the gospel to depend on Him. The third thing he says is that the law brings us to the end of ourselves. That's what it's designed to do. He says, I was alive. I was once alive apart from the law. When the commandment came, sin came alive, and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it, it killed me. He says, I was once alive apart from the law. That's not saving faith or living faith. It means that I was once not burdened by all this. Once I had no conviction of all this. I was just going right along in life and everything was good and I didn't think about it and it was all good. Sin wasn't nipping at my heels. The law wasn't over me because I had been condemned as a sinner. I was alive without it. I didn't think about it not one bit. He said, but when the commandment came, he said, sin came alive in me and I died. He said, wait a minute, wasn't Paul a Pharisee? Wasn't he raised in the law? How could the commandment suddenly come to him? Shouldn't he have known the commandments? Yeah, but he was just like all the other Pharisees. They thought that just because they were outwardly doing the law, because they were outwardly not doing the things that God had told them not to do, that they were keeping the law. Just because I hadn't slept with anybody, that means I haven't committed adultery. Just because I haven't took anybody's life, that means I'm not a murderer. And Jesus came on the scene, and He said, that's not the intent of the law at all. He said, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that if you look at another with lust in your heart, you have committed adultery in your heart. You have broken the command by what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your mind. He said, if you hate another, you have committed murder in your heart. And so the command comes alive and you realize, that's me. I'm the one doing these things. And it brings you to the end of yourself. Sin came alive, he says, and I died. It always tickles me when people talk about Jesus softening the law. When reality is Jesus made the law harder to follow. It wasn't just outwardly, it's inwardly as well. To say, I'm keeping the law because I haven't slept with anybody. Jesus said, no. It's a lust problem. It's a heart problem. It's a mind problem. It tickles me to death when people present Jesus as like this, flower power hippie guru guy, just whatever. No, Jesus made the law tougher. He showed the intent was about your mind and your heart and the motivations of your life. Oh yes, we talked about love Wednesday night and we read 1 Corinthians 13, one of the most beautiful chapters in the Bible. But I told him, it scares me because this is what we're called to do. We're supposed to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, with all our strength. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. We're supposed to love our enemies. And this is what love looks like. Love suffers long and is patient and is kind. To me, that was just adding law upon law. Unless I am patient, unless I'm kind, unless I'm long-suffering, unless I don't seek my own, always think the best, I'm not loving. All that is more law. It scares me to death. But what it does is exactly what it's supposed to do. It brings me to the end of myself. I can't do it. I cannot fulfill this law. I cannot even come close to reaching the standard, the tape measure that God has laid out and said, this is what you must be if you're going to be righteous. I can't even come close to it. And so he says, the very commandment that promised life, if you meet this standard, you will have life. He said it proved to be death to me because sin took the opportunity of that commandment, and sin did what sin always does. It deceives. He said it deceived me through the law, through the commandment. It killed me. It brought me to there's nothing I can do. When I was dealing with all this, this love and what it means, and you don't love people the way you're supposed to love people, it brought me to the end of myself. You can't do that, and I need to get better at this. The realization came, you cannot change your heart. And it brought me to the end of myself, and it pushed me to the cross. And he said, you grab that cross and you be desperately dependent upon me and my power. You seek my kingdom and my righteousness, and all these other things will take care of themselves. The commandment is a mirror that pushes us. It shows us who we are, and it's a schoolmaster that pushes us to Christ. You cannot succeed if you try to live by the law. If you try to please God by the law, you cannot succeed. And we Christians fall back into living that way all the time. And we wonder, where did my joy go? Where did my peace go? Where did my zeal and my fire go? When the woman came into the Pharisee's house, Jesus told a little parable, forgave the woman, and he told that Pharisee, he says, who do you think loves me more? The one who's been forgiven little, or the one who's been forgiven much? When we think I'm doing good and everything's good and it's all good and I'm walking good and I'm holy and God sure is proud of me and I don't have that much sin and it's all great, do you think we love God and His gospel much in those moments? No, it's when we're brought to the end of ourselves and we say, I can't do this and there's nothing for me and I don't deserve anything and I haven't done anything right. It's in those moments when we see the grace of God displayed in Jesus Christ and we say, I love you, and our zeal and our joy for the gospel, it blossoms and it grows and it is, I don't know. It's good. We need this. We need the law. And I got to tell you, it hurts. When the law comes and reveals to you that you don't love folks, it hurts. It's convicting, it's humbling, and it's no fun. When the law comes, you believer who've been born again, and it shows you something that you're involved in, something that's going on in your life that's sin, that God absolutely deems as sin. You can't get around it. You can't say that it's not sin. You can't justify yourself anymore. Let me tell you what, it hurts. But it's exactly what we need to push us to the cross. For us to find our joy in the cross. Most of the time, I tell people this all the time, most of the time, people want to grow in their relationship with Christ. They want to grow in God. They want to grow in their relationship with Him. And when you get closer to God, His holiness will always reveal more of your sin. And you know what happens? That hurts. And so often people will begin that process and they'll dive into their relationship with God and they'll draw close to God, and the more sin will be revealed and conviction comes with that, and all of that comes, and what happens? It hurts, and so they run away. They do what Adam did. They go hide somewhere. They go try to fix themselves. They go try to work and get this fixed up so I can come back. That is not the growing Christian life. The growing Christian life clings to God, saying, I know that I can't do this. I know there is no hope for me here. I know that I'm a sinner, and I recognize that sin, and it is just as bad as you say it is, but that makes me love the cross even more. Makes me see the gospel for what it is and know who I am in Jesus Christ, not because I'm doing so good, but because I'm doing nothing good. But He gave me His righteousness. Last thing it shows us is that the law shows us the sinfulness of sin. He says, after all this, He wants us to know the law is not the problem. We're the problem. He says, so the law is holy, and the commandment is holy. That means it reflects the nature of God. And it's righteous, which means it's not unreasonable, it's not unfair, and it's good, which means it's not here to oppress you, it's for your good. He said, did that which is good, the law, then bring death to me? No. It was sin producing death in me through the law, through what was good, in order that, this is the reason why, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. We have got to stop with the excuses for sin and the justifying sin, and you just didn't know what was going on. Right? I had a hard day that day. Sin is exactly what God says it is. Sin. The board is what I say it was. It's 2 foot and 11 inches. I don't care what kind of day you had. I don't care what you hope it will be. I don't care what your intentions were when you cut it. The board is 2 foot 11 inches. You can't make it any longer. You can't make it, well, I guess you can make it shorter, but you can't make it any longer. The law tells us what sin is, and it shows us the sinfulness of it. It's not a disease. It's not a sickness. It's not a mistake. It's a sin. Dana went to youth camp this week, and so we had SpaghettiOs and macaroni all week long. But you know what happens when the wife leaves for a week? I don't know how it happens, but things just get messy. It gets messy, man. So, like any good husband, I was shoving stuff under the bed before she got home, cleaning up, trying to straighten up. Wiping all the dust off of the, cleaned all the dust off the coffee table and the end tables and all that stuff, and it looked good. It looked good. I mean, by my standard, it looked real good. But when I opened the blind, the sunlight came in. It's dust everywhere. I mean, flying around in the air, settling over. I mean, the dust was always there, but the light reveals it for what it is. These things that are in us, this lack of love that I've been talking to you about my own personal life, it's not, I guess it is an obstacle, but it's not just an obstacle to overcome. It's a sin. It's wicked and wretched, and it reveals the blackness of my heart. It is evil because God says that it's evil. But for we who know Christ, it doesn't lead us to despair. It doesn't lead us to fall down in the floor and not function, or to go get in a ditch somewhere, because we're not presented before God by how good we do. We're presented to God by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. So the growing Christian life doesn't put sin on the bottom shelf and say, it's not that bad, we all deal with it. When I was first, not too long after I became a Christian, I went to a men's Bible study that with a lot of older men that were mentoring me along, and I don't know how the conversation got there, but it focused back on lust and a man's battle with lust of the eyes, lust of, all that kind of stuff. And the consensus among these mentors of mine, these godly men who've been walking with Jesus forever, was, that's just what men do. You just got to live with it. It's all good. Yeah. That's not what sin is. Sin is wicked. And it's disgusting in the eyes of God. It's wretched and it's horrible. We're going to get to the end of this chapter, and Paul's going to say, "Oh, wretched man that I am, Who's going to deliver me from this body of death? Sin is sinful. Let me ask you as the praise band comes, how do you view your sin? Is it just, well, we're kind of dealing with it. It's all good. You know, that's just life, man. I mean, it's life here living in this world. Is that how you see sin? That's not what the tape measure says. That's not what the law of God says. Even as Christians, listen to me. Listen to me. Don't get it twisted. You're not saved by the law. You're not saved by keeping the law. You're not saved by getting rid of your sin. You're not saved by living right. You're not saved by doing righteous. You're not righteous before God because you're getting rid of the sin that's in your life or your walk. None of that makes you righteous. But when you start saying that sin is not sinful, when you start saying, I'm not as bad as other people, I'm not as bad as all that, you hamstring your Christian growth. You hamstring your love and your joy in the gospel. You hamstring your zeal for what God has done. And you'll wake up one morning and you'll say, what happened to me? I used to be on fire for God. I used to be zealous to go and do for Him. I used to be so in love with what He's done. What happened to me? One of the reasons is that we grow to a point where sin is just not that sinful to us anymore. It's not that abhorrent to us anymore. It's not that wicked anymore. It's just part of life. That's not what the tape measure says. Maybe today you are trying to please God by just doing law. How's that working for you? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. Has a minute passed by today since your feet hit the floor that you have loved God as He commands you to be loved, as He commands Himself to be loved? If you have, I'd love to meet you. If you haven't, then just like me, you need a Savior. And Jesus gave His life to pay for all of your sin. You'll battle it until you see Jesus, but the penalty for it will be gone. And the Father will look at you and He will say, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. You cannot fight sin by keeping law. You must have the grace of God that is given in the cross of Jesus Christ. If you don't know Christ today, trust Him. Repent of your sin and trust in Jesus. I talked to a young man, probably 6 years old this week, went to his house and talked to him. And we talked about being saved, and he wanted to know all these things, and we talked about it. And the thing I left him with, son, if you don't remember anything else I said, remember this. If you want to be right with God, you must trust in Jesus. And I made him repeat it. And I made him repeat it. And I made him repeat it. I don't know if he got saved that time or not, or I don't know, but I do know that he will remember. If I want to be right with God, I must trust in Jesus. Trust in Him today. Will you stand with me?